This is Stand Up for the Truth, addressing important issues and topics affecting Christians across the nation.
Good morning, it's Crash Connell. It is Friday, June 14, 2024, and it's been a while since we had our guest on, so I want to remind you that it will be posted on our YouTube channel, Q90 FM Radio, Q90 FM Radio on YouTube. Depending on the topic, if it gets kind of heavy, it might be on our Rumble page, CTRN Online, and so check that out here. Mary Danielsen, fresh new podcast.
Indeed. It is Friday, June 14th. We're welcoming back Andy Woods today. It dawned on me we hadn't had him on since February, leading up to his conference at the time. So really happy to have him back. It's always good to see what he's looking at in this world. Always solid insights on a variety of issues. There is no end of issues that we can look at. So we'll jump into that rather quickly here. My scripture today is Psalm 134, the whole thing. Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who by night stand in the house of the Lord. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord. The Lord who made heaven and earth, bless you from Zion. Short and sweet. Let's pray together. Lord, you are our strong tower, our hiding place in all seasons. From generation to generation, we thank you that you never change. And as so many saints who have gone before us, we can confidently trust that you have all things in your hands and that you desire our utmost good. Help us to be good stewards of the time you've given us, to give hope to those who are trying to make sense of life. We lift up Andy and his loved ones, his fellowship, for protection and continued discernment, an extra measure of wisdom in these times, for good health, encouragement, and refreshment in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Andy Woods, pastor of Sugarland Bible Church in Sugarland, Texas, author and speaker, president of Chafer Theological Seminary. He teaches verse by verse through the scriptures. His internet YouTube presence, Pastor's Point of View. We're going to have the link to that in the podcast post description today so that you can subscribe. If you missed the link, you can always go to YouTube and just do a search for Pastor's Point of View, Andy Woods, and the page will come up. New content twice a week. That's fantastic. Good morning, Andy. Welcome back to Stand Up for the Truth.
Mary, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We have so much to cover. I think we should just jump in, and we're going to start with Israel, the world against Israel. And this headline centers on Mexico. They have requested to join the ICJ genocide case against Israel. As listeners know, they have a new president in Mexico, their first female. She is Jewish. She is a climate scientist. But here it says the International Court of Justice yesterday announced it had received a request from Mexico to join the genocide case filed by South Africa against Israel due to the war on Gaza Strip. And they have invoked Article 63 of the ICJ statute and a declaration of intervention in this case concerning the crime of genocide in the Gaza Strip. Andy, there's a power grab going on. These international courts who think more of themselves maybe than they ought to, or what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, the reason this kind of story is interesting to me is related to the prophet Zechariah, who twice, chapter 12, verse 3, and chapter 14, verse 2, says, in the end of the age, the whole world will be against Israel and Jerusalem. And we're literally seeing the unfolding of that passage constantly. And this is kind of the latest outworking of it. It has to do with the argument that Israel is what they're doing by trying to root out terrorism or Hamas in the Gaza Strip post-October the 7th is somehow genocidal, which is crazy. It's not genocidal at all. In fact, it's Israel that gave the Gaza Strip, back to the Gazans, Palestinians, back in 2004. So that doesn't sound to me like a genocidal power at all. But because they're trying to protect themselves from terrorism within their own borders, they're being charged with a war crime by the International Court of Justice. And what you're starting to see in the news is all of these nations, kind of piling on and joining in this international lawsuit. It's interesting that this was originally brought by South Africa, as if South Africa has any reason to boast, in the area of genocide and apartheid. And then you've got all these other nations that are, piling on. I mean, America's allies in Europe, 3 of them, I believe, are now piling on. Now Mexico is piling on. And it's sort of exasperated with you just mentioned, the election of the new Mexican president or president of Mexico. Although she's Jewish, she's very far to the left, and she seems to be sort of, as far as I can tell, kind of a self-loathing Jew in the sense that she's not pro-Israel at all. So I think the situation there is going to get worse. And the situation around the world is going to get worse as all of these nations are now globally uniting against the nation of Israel simply for defending itself, post-October the 7th. And I can't help but think of this and think of Zechariah's prophecies at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. And when you said self-loathing, that phrase had popped into my head right before you said it. I thought this is a classic example of that, along with George Soros and people like that who just don't get it. And Germany said not too long ago, I think it was fairly recently, if Netanyahu sets foot on German soil, he would be arrested. Talk about being on the wrong side of everything. What are they thinking?
Well, I mean, that's just an astounding thing. I mean, that the Prime Minister of Israel can't travel to Germany. Yeah. I mean, his world shrinks where he can go and where he can't go because of the influence of this ICJ and the related organizations, the International Criminal Court. By the way, you remember they did the same thing to George Bush, the second Bush, related to what he did in Iraq. He in their mind violated some kind of international law, and so his world shrunk, and he can only travel certain places, or else he's going to be arrested. I mean, that's the presence of the New World Order right there, globalism, and now you see it not just turning against the United States, you're seeing it turn against Israel. You're actually seeing the Biden administration, I'm sure that'll come up later in some of these articles, cooperating with it. So you've got 2 prophecies in play, the rise of the last days New World Order and the united mindset of the nations against Israel in the last days. So things are moving very, very quickly.
And I looked up the ICJ and the ICC because I was curious what the difference was. And the International Court of Justice is a civil tribunal to hear disputes between countries. The ICC prosecutes individuals. And, I note, too, Andy, that we are being regulated to death in this world, a lot of it under the guise of climate change. Don't do this, don't do that, can't drive this, can't buy that. And so we're getting used to regulations that, of course, the other side of that results in prosecution. And so Big Brother is going through the courts to set up this New World Order so that you can't move to the right or to the left without paying a heavy price. And I think this is a fascinating development in the world, and I think the ICJ is just a big part of that. So here come the regulations, as if we didn't already know that, but it's getting a little more treacherous on planet Earth here. So go ahead.
Yeah, and one of the things to understand about these international courts is they don't have the same constitutional protections that we're used to in our system. I mean, our system in the United States comes out of a Judeo-Christian framework, where all people are made in God's image, and therefore they deserve certain unalienable rights. Right. And what you see when you actually get into the particulars of the ICJ, the ICC, is a lot of the rights that we, take for granted don't even exist. I mean, things like the right to a speedy trial. I mean, you could be jailed and not tried for a long period of time. The right to confront your accusers, the right to have your case proven against you by a jury of your peers, beyond a reasonable doubt. The right, take this one, the right to not experience double jeopardy, being tried twice for the same offense. I mean, all of that is missing in these international courts, and so they can just try you over and over again until they win. And so the more we acquiesce to these globalist systems, particularly the ICC, which which I think is just the legal arm of the New World Order. I mean, the more we can expect to see our rights deteriorate for those of us in the United States and also for Israel.
Yeah. Whenever I hear a news bit about an American being stuck overseas in prison for some small infraction or large, like the was it Trinidad and Tobago? Some couple had they had bullets in his bag that had not from a previous hunting trip. They had not been used, and they were threatening him with 12 years. And I'm thinking, is this? It kind of sends chills down your spine when you realize that Americans get stuck over there, and you really, really are concerned for everything for them. And I think sometimes this is going to be the New World Order, people being stuck in prison for even within our own country for we know not what.
Well, I don't watch a lot of television, but every time this particular show comes on, I watch it. I forgot the title of it. It's on cable. It's called something like Being Jailed Abroad.
Oh, okay.
And it just records these horror stories of what you're talking about. Of Americans having bullets in your suitcase because you used them during a hunting trip, and you forgot they were there. These kind of cases of Americans just being locked up abroad. In fact, that might be the title of the show. I think it's called Locked Up Abroad.
Yeah,
and people need to watch that because the rights that we get here are not respected around the world, and you can't expect our rights that we take for granted to be respected if we go under these international, kind of judicial systems, which is where everything is moving.
I don't know if I should watch it. I might have nightmares. But it does sound very, very interesting. I might look into that. Let's go on to the UN reform, because the Israeli ambassador is calling for, or hopefully, traveling hopefully here, a reform of the UN. That's very interesting, and I think it centers around the UN having a moment of silence for the dictator of Iran, Raisi. The UN has lost its credibility, I think, some time ago. But do you think it's ever possible? I think Trump wanted to defund the UN, if I remember right.
Yeah. Well, this moment of silence for this, Iranian number 2 guy that was killed in the helicopter accident recently, I mean, that's like having a moment of silence for Adolf Hitler. Yeah. I mean, it's insanity. This guy, his nickname is the Butcher of Tehran, and he didn't get that name, that nickname accidentally.
Right.
And the United Nations does this kind of stuff all of the time. They're very anti-Israel in their outlook. They're very anti-United States in their outlook, and yet this article points out that we pay $20 billion with a B.
Wow.
$20 billion with a B in terms of their budget every year. For what? It's like paying for someone so they can abuse you. Yeah. And I hope Trump, if he gets back in, makes good on his promises, to get us out of the United Nations. If indeed that is one of his promises. I'm not sure if he's promised that overtly. I think he is more of a nationalist and would want to weaken the power of the United Nations. Yeah. But it's like paying for a bunch of people that don't share your values, that just want to abuse you and Israel. And here's this, UN ambassador saying America needs to, really reevaluate whether she's going to be involved in the United Nations. I saw another article. I didn't send it to you because it is very recent. But Netanyahu has recently said the same thing. He said we are reevaluating as Israelis whether we're even going to play a part, in the United Nations.
Yeah, I wonder if that would happen if the U.S. would just bail on the UN, if they would pick up their toys from the sandbox and go over to Europe or somewhere like that. Because every once in a while I hear rumblings of that. Well, they'll just move somewhere else. Do you think that would ever happen?
Oh, I know that's going to happen. I mean, I'm a big believer that Babylon means Babylon, and I've thought for a long time. Chuck Missler, who said this also, that it's just a matter of time before the United Nations moves to Babylon in fulfillment of Revelation 17 and 18. And so, if we're in the last days, I guess my view is let's get the show on the road.
Yeah.
Get out of our country and go set up your empire of the Antichrist, where the Bible says you're going to build it where the original Tower of Babel once stood. So I sort of, anticipate that happening at some point.
Yeah. Wow. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Andy Woods, and we're talking about last days things and headlines that are very hard to keep up with. I want to just go one step further with the death of Racy, because suspicions abound, and Time Magazine has an article, I think it's this week, the list of potential suspects in the mysterious death of Iran's President Raisi. And it's very, very interesting. The two helicopters, I think The Economist also mentioned this, the two helicopters accompanying the president returned safely to Tabriz. Rescue workers had to go in on foot. The helicopter with the president and his men had exploded. The chief of staff said skies were clear, although you will see some foggy scenes of rescue workers going in there. I want to ask you if you have thoughts on that, because it does change the power dynamic. How can it not? And Khamenei still has the power, and his successor was on board. So, paint me in a conspiracy corner here, but what do you think about the death of Raisi and those with him?
Well, the whole thing is very strange. And, I mean, first of all, why would you put the number 2 and number 3 guy in the same helicopter, which is my understanding of what happened? That doesn't make any sense. And what little I've read on the subject, the helicopter was kind of an older, model. I mean, why would you put the number 2 and the number 3 guy in an older helicopter? I mean, that's just strange. It's just, I mean, I just don't think any government would be that negligent. So, and given the fact that we, as the mere citizens, are really given a very small fraction of the information, I'm always very inquisical as to exactly what's going on. I don't think it's conspiracy theory at all. I just think it's using the minds that God gave us, and a lot of the things that happen in the news, we're not given the full story, and sometimes there's some kind of subterfuge, going on underneath the surface. So, I don't want to cast a judgment until I understand all the facts, and we really aren't given all the facts a lot of times, so there could be some, hanky-panky of sorts going on here.
Yeah. Yeah, they say that Khamenei shed a lot more tears over the death of Soleimani than he did over these guys, that he was very steely during the funeral. And here's what I thought, because April 14th was the date that Iran launched its drone attack on Israel. Did they want the world to think Israel did it?
They could very well be setting up Israel to blame Israel. I mean, this kind of thing happens a lot, particularly in the Middle East. I remember it was in Turkey. A coup took place, supposedly, which allowed Erdogan at that time to, consolidate greater power. And, of course, a lot of people pointed out that this coup was actually started by Erdogan himself. So, this is how these dictators think. It's all about power, and you grab more and more power when you have a crisis. And if you don't have a natural crisis, then you can kind of create your own. And so, who knows? Maybe they wanted to use this somehow to blame Israel. Maybe it backfired. But the whole thing to me is very, very strange. I just don't understand why you'd put the number 2 and number 3 guy in an older model helicopter. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah, and I had read that they have not spent any time or money specifically upgrading their helicopters. They spend all their money on enrichment in uranium, so at the expense of everything else, including their citizens. So that's just one more angle on there. You have an article here. U.S. envoy accuses Israel of continued pattern of significant civilian harm. The Hamas leaders and fighters hide among civilians. Well, yeah, I guess that would be interesting. But, what about the rights of Israelis, the upheaval they've suffered, the damage to their national economy, the rights of the hostages? Come on, Hamas, tell us all about that international humanitarian law that you're so, fond of. And what about Israel, the right not to be raped or beheaded, for instance? I mean, it's the hypocrisy, Andy, is just constant. There's a free flow of hypocrisy.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that people need to understand is Hamas just makes things up.
Yeah,
I mean, their numbers about, how they're being persecuted by the Israelis in Gaza. Statisticians, there's a number of articles people can find out there, have tried to look into this, and their numbers just don't make any sense. And then you throw in the factor that they deliberately hide, behind women and children and in hospitals. And when there's collateral damage, which is unfortunate in any war, suddenly the Israelis are accused of, some kind of gross human rights violation. So all these numbers that we hear from the UN coming from Hamas about the abuse of the Gazans at the hands of the Israelis, you have to take all of that with a grain of salt. And what's sad about this article here is the United States envoy is buying into those numbers and regurgitating them. And that bothers me as a Christian because God's word is very clear that he will bless or curse those based on whether they bless or curse the nation of Israel. And so when we're regurgitating Hamas propaganda, we're not moving in the right direction,
right.
As a country.
Absolutely. And this latest dust-up has to do with an Israeli airstrike on May 26th. Because there were, I don't know how many, Andy, Palestinian civilians were killed and injured.
That I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, so they're urging Israel to do more to protect innocent Palestinian lives. It's all, there's no winners here. Of course, everybody is sad, but again, the rights of Israelis, no one ever seems to care about that. And it says here, Robert Wood added that Washington has emphasized that Israel must, number one, connect its military operations to a political strategy that it can ensure the lasting defeat of Hamas. Number two, the release of all the hostages and a better future. Number three, for the Palestinian people. That's a pretty tall order. And no matter what Israel does, it's under a microscope, but there's no problem with giving them these tall orders of what they need to do to make the global community play nice.
Well, who are we to tell a sovereign nation, how they prosecute their own war? And beyond that, there was a peace treaty. It was on October 6th.
Yeah.
And the peace treaty was broken by Hamas. Yeah. And so the Israelis are responding to that. It would be like, I don't know, some kind of terrorist camp setting up shop in the United States and using it to launch missiles and projectiles and what have you into American cities. What would we do under that circumstance? We would root out terrorism, and if the rest of the nations of the world thought we were acting inhumane, we would just laugh it off. Well, why can't Israel as a sovereign nation, be given that same right? Israel didn't attack anybody on October the 7th. They were the ones attacked, and what they're doing now is just preventive maintenance, trying to prevent another October 7th scenario, which, by the way, was their equivalent of our 9/11. When you look at it on a per capita basis, they're just trying to prevent that kind of scenario from materializing again. And so we need to, I think, defer to the Israelis and not tell them how they should prosecute their own war of self-defense.
Yeah. A lot of delusion out there amongst the nations, and God's going to sort it all out.
Yes, He is.
I'm happy about that. This Israeli proposal, claiming that it was Israel's proposal, and Biden openly lied about that. The lying part doesn't surprise me, but the fact that he thought he could get away with this, he presented a 3-part proposal on Friday. I think that was June 1st, somewhere in there, end of May, first part of June. And claimed 4 times that it was Israel's proposal. He waited until the onset of Shabbat to make his remarks. The article says, making it more difficult for the Israeli government to respond. It did not call for the destruction or disarmament of Hamas, of course. He told Israelis in his speech that they could not expect total victory. But former President Obama let it slip that the proposal was actually Biden's and not Israel's. Wow. Oh, what a mess, Andy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what a stunning development.
Yeah.
The Biden administration comes up with a plan that Hamas loves and claims that the Israelis came up with the plan when in fact the Israelis had nothing to do with the plan, and then This piece of propaganda is set forth for the world during Shabbat, when the Israelis don't have an opportunity, to respond. And then you learn that Obama is involved in this. Yeah. Former President Barack Obama let it slip that the proposal was actually Biden's and not Israel's proposal. What's Obama doing being involved in this? I thought he was an ex-president. Yeah. Well, I guess what we're learning is the Biden administration is basically Obama's third term. Mm-hmm. Biden, as we can all see, his constant struggling with his, mental limitations, the onset of dementia most likely, and other things, is really just an empty suit or an empty vessel that Obama, who never really stopped being president, is pouring his own personal agenda into. And so all of the anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism that we saw during Obama's first or two terms is now being replicated through the empty vessel Joe Biden in now what appears to be Obama's third term. And the whole thing is pro-Hamas, anti-Israel to the core, deception, lying, and releasing the information during Shabbat while the administration knows full well that the Israelis don't have an opportunity to respond to the propaganda. So this is the kind of thing that our country now, which at one time was a great ally of Israel, is doing to Israel. And by the way, Biden says all this while at the same time he's saying our support for Israel is ironclad. Well, I'm sorry, actions speak louder than words. We in the United States are fitting into Zechariah's prophecy, all the nations coming against Israel in the last days.
That insight about, lights on, nobody home, and Biden and Obama taking advantage of that's spiritual. That's a very interesting perspective. I'm glad you shared that with us. This article is from Breitbart. And one of the quotes here is, Biden's intent appears to have been to box Israel into a deal that Hamas would have approved, making it harder for Israel to reject it. Rather than claiming credit for the proposal, he presented it as if it had come from Israel, which would serve to undermine trust between Netanyahu and the right-wing parties in his coalition, bringing down the Israeli government. That is absolutely demonic.
Yeah, and the agenda, Israel is kind of complicated. They have a different kind of governing structure than we have here. They have a coalition structure. So if you can disrupt the coalition, you can remove Netanyahu from power. And the Biden administration and Obama before him have long since, interfered, I believe, in Israeli elections, trying to remove Netanyahu from power because he won't cooperate, with their so-called, two-state solution. And, what does this remind you of? Israel being coerced into an agreement. I mean, doesn't that remind you of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, where the Antichrist is going to confirm a covenant with Israel, which will start the 7-year tribulation period? I'm not saying this is that. Yeah. What I'm saying is the psychology for Daniel 9:27 is now in place, and you see, the Biden administration pushing that.
Very interesting. I mean, the whole world order, economy, everything is sort of a turnkey unit. It's a plug and play because after the rapture of the church, I believe that so many things are going to fall into place, and they're already there. Yeah. It's just a matter of time before they fall into place. Very, very interesting insights into all that. We're going to talk about the Gog and Magog alignment when we come back. I also want to ask you about the EU elections. I don't know if you've been following the parliamentary elections or not, but we're going to talk about that when we come back. I'm talking to Pastor Andy Woods of Sugarland Bible Church. Pastor's Point of View is his YouTube presence. Look into that. You can subscribe. So we'll be back in 2 minutes with more.
As we look forward to this motorcycle ride this summer, we at the Police Lights of Christmas Ministries want to make sure this registering process is made simple as possible. Hop onto the link provided by the Facebook page, scroll down a little bit. You could register a 2-wheeled vehicle, a 3-wheeled trike, a 4-wheeled vehicle, or you could even cover an officer's lunch and add a Mission barbecue lunch. Once your card is full, continue to the payment process via Square Pay, and boom, you're registered for the police ride with the lights. The sun may be shining right now in Wisconsin, but now until July, inside the Resch Center, it's blizzard season.
Handoff to Terrence Smith to the goal line. Touchdown, Green Bay.
The Green Bay Blizzard are an indoor football team that plays in the IFL and are now excited to become a business underwriter of the Q90FM ministry.
Loading up and throwing deep, and this ball is caught for a touchdown.
Game schedules and more information can be found at greenbayblizzard.com. Green Bay Blizzard, supporting Q90FM.
Feedback, questions, and topic suggestions are always appreciated. Email us at comments@standupforthetruth.com.
Welcome back to Stand Up for the Truth for this Friday. We're speaking with Andy Woods today. Always a pleasure. Pastor of Sugarland Bible Church in Sugarland, Texas. And make sure you subscribe to his YouTube channel, Pastor's Point of View. There's so much content there. We're going to talk about the Gog and Magog alignment. Russia wants to build a logistical support center on Sudan's Red Sea coast. What is that exactly, Andy, and what are they going to use that for? Let's talk about Gog and Magog.
Well, the article, to me is very interesting because I've heard a lot of people say, we're a long way away from the Ezekiel 38 and 39 Gog-Magog invasion because North Africa, is not in place. Just to kind of recap, Cush would be the Sudan, and Put would be Libya.
Okay.
So those are basically two entities there in North Africa. Well, lo and behold, you have a Russian presence not only in Libya, you have a Russian presence now in Sudan, and this article has a map indicating a Russian presence all over North Africa. So that is very interesting because Ezekiel's prophecies predict this alliance between these North African nations and Rosh or Russia invading Israel in the last days. And so what you're seeing is the two different points geographically now conspiring with one another, making the whole Gog-Magog invasion, all the more credible as North Africa apparently is going to be involved because of this Russian presence. And when you keep reading this article, you also see Iran is involved. Now, Iran, we believe, is Persia in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 invasion. So there's Persia and Rosh involved with Cush and Put, Libya and the Sudan. And this is exactly the kind of alliance that Ezekiel predicted, 2,600 years ago. So this argument that, we're a long way away from the Gog-Magog invasion because North Africa is not yet in place, that argument is disappearing.
Yep.
Based on an article like this.
Now, Ethiopia, where do they fit in? Because sometimes these are regional countries. The borders are different than they would have been over many centuries. Ethiopia and Sudan, is that sort of a geographical area that was one at one point?
Well, Cush, Josephus, and that's really where these, how you identify these players, because you see all these names there in Genesis 10, the Table of Nations. It's just a matter of figuring out, using some historical sources where Noah's descendants settled. And so Josephus is a real help to us. He tells us that Cush settled in Ethiopia. And, in fact, a lot of Bible translations, if I remember right, the New American Standard Bible perhaps, and others just writes Ethiopia right over the Hebrew word Cush, in the English translation. But you're right, the designation Ethiopia is misleading because the ancient country of Ethiopia extended all the way down into the Sudan. So we believe that the Sudan some way, somehow, has to play some kind of role in this end-time invasion. We weren't exactly sure how this would materialize, but now you're seeing more and more things in the news related to a Russian and Iranian presence, in the Sudan, right down to building, logistical ports and military facilities. And by the way, you also see a Russian presence in nearby Niger, which, basically is right next door to some of these countries. So, it's just a mind-boggling time that we're living in, where it's not just the nations that Ezekiel predicts posturing against Israel in the last days, it's their cooperation with one another.
Yeah.
And that's why this article is fascinating.
It is fascinating, and I read several months ago now, the Wagner Group from Russia down in the Sudan digging around for gold and minerals and that sort of thing. So there's definitely a lot going on that way. There's spoils that they're looking for. And also the JNIM is mentioned in this article, and that was fascinating to me because it's a jihadi organization that aligns itself with Al-Qaeda's global jihadist ideology, and they're trying to build an Islamist state in West Africa and expel Western influences from the region. So there is a lot of balls in the air when it comes to Africa, and I think we need to pay attention.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's and we don't know how. We're not date setters. I mean, we don't know how long this stage setting is going to transpire, before the invasion. And Bible scholars are divided, really, on exactly when this invasion will take place. I more think it'll be a tribulation period event, but there's an awful lot of people that think this will happen before the tribulation period starts. My friend Thomas Ice puts it, post-rapture, pre-70th week, but no matter how you cut it, I mean, this invasion is coming really quick in the end time scenario, and we don't know exactly, we can't set a date for it, but prophecies are such that they're not fulfilled in a vacuum.
Right.
Every prophecy of the Bible you can think of, long in advance, God, set the stage for the fulfillment of that particular prophecy, and you're certainly seeing that in the news constantly related to this Gog Magog issue.
And sometimes there's a little span of time between verses, too, that we don't see. We see the mountain peaks of prophecy. We don't see the valleys or how it will play out. So we got to, as we get closer, though, things become clearer. Andy, here's another thing that I've been following. It has to do with Russia building a railroad infrastructure to allow trade routes. And the reason for that is because trade with Europe was the main pillar of Russia's economy. For centuries, they were totally dependent on Europe for trade, and now they're forging new trade routes so that they can skirt Western restrictions. Europe is holding $300 billion of frozen Russian assets. And so the war in Ukraine really put a wrench in the works here. Western sanctions, other restrictions, they're cut off from European markets. They're spending a lot of money to build a railroad down to the Persian Gulf alongside of Iran's coast. And Middle East turmoil is disrupting global trade as well. So we got to throw BRICS in the mix. You got to throw this trade route in the mix. Russia is very, very busy looking out for their own interests. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's important to think about because Ezekiel 38 verses 12 and 13 tell us the human motive for the invasion will be wealth or spoils. In fact, it says there specifically silver and gold. So, Russia having financial problems, Russia's interest in gold that you're talking about, trying to back the Russian currency with gold. I mean, all of these things are factors, that will motivate Russia's final move, really, from the remote north, into the Middle East, invading the land of Israel, to get their hands on Israel's wealth, which is an amazing prophecy in and of itself because God said Israel would return to her own land and become wealthy. That's what all of these prophecies indicate. And, the quote from Mark Twain, who visited that part of the world in 1867 and wrote about it in his book Innocents Abroad, 1869, he says there's absolutely nothing here but a barren expanse. And so it seems so far-fetched that these prophecies could ever be fulfilled. In fact, C.I. Scofield, in the Scofield Study Bible, was completely and totally ridiculed in the notes for saying Russia is going to invade Israel because of wealth. And it's like, what are you talking about? There is no Israel, number one, in 1909. Number two, Russia was a Christian Orthodox country. The Communist Revolution of 1917 hadn't even transpired yet. And certainly Israel was not in their land and certainly wasn't becoming wealthy. But Schofield said, well, I'm just a literalist, and the Bible means what it says and says what it means. And look at us today. Nobody's laughing anymore at Schofield's 1909 Bible study notes because he just took the Bible at face value, and we're living now in a time period where history has finally caught up to what God said would take place in the end times.
Yeah, absolutely. I love looking at old postcards of Israel. I look for them sometimes on eBay, and just to see the cityscape or lack thereof. I mean, there's nothing built there. It's just shepherds and goats and all of that. And then I do that just to compare and just to acknowledge what the Lord has done over so many years, and having been there myself. And it even changes. If you don't go there for a while, it even changes. Absolutely fascinating insights there.
Yes.
Speaking of Iran, which we have been off and on here, the stockpile of uranium, enriched uranium, where are they at with that? Because even though Raisi's gone, et cetera, they're still working on this. They say it's a peaceful program, Andy, but why would any of us buy that line? Where are they at with enriching uranium? Enough for one or more? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're very close to the weapons grade levels that they need, and even this might not even be accurate. I've read a lot of sources indicating that they're already there. In other words, we already have an atomic Ayatollah. They already have the WMDs, and this is a frightening thing for a lot of reasons. You're dealing with people that have a Shiite Muslim mindset, where I think it is the 12th Imam is going to come back during a time of chaos, which they can accelerate by causing chaos. We're going to let people like this get their hands on weapons of mass destruction. Yeah. And all these things they've been saying to the world community, that we're not there yet. What you have to understand is that in Islam, there's something called taqiyya, where you are allowed to lie in order to advance the cause of Allah. So all these statements that they make to us about we're abiding by the agreement, well, they're just basically bald-faced lies. And the article goes on and talks about how they've hampered and injured the ability of weapons inspectors, according to the Iran deal, to inspect what's going on, and they've actually gotten rid of the cameras that are supposed to be monitoring, Iranian progress in this regard. So we've got now on the world stage a rogue power that is Shiite, a Shiite theocracy, and if they don't have their hands on nukes now, they're certainly on the precipice of getting them. And all of this is prophetically significant because Ezekiel predicted an aggressive Iranian, Persian power in the last days, and that's what we're seeing materialize.
Yes, we are indeed, and I don't see them cooperating any more than they already have, which is zero. So, we can guess. I think the officials around the world are sort of guessing because, like you described them, they're just a rogue Islamic power, and nothing good can come of it, and a lot can possibly go wrong with it. So we have to keep an eye on that. Also, let's talk a little bit about these anti-Israel protesters. It's still going on. There's a Gatestone Institute article that says anti-Israel student protesters pick up some big fans. Hezbollah Deputy Secretary General, he waxed enthusiastic about their protests, saying, "When the American people take a stand in support of Gaza, we salute and applaud them, and we appreciate this very much." Also, Al-Qaeda said, we were happy, and every Muslim was happy with these revenge attacks, he calls it, and operations carried out by the youth of the Islamic Nation. They're called, that's us, by the way. Talk about useful idiots, also on the wrong side of everything, Andy. What about... because Khomeini, he sent a letter to American students about this?
Yeah, all these, because of what happened earlier, we talked about April 14th and what happened October 7th of last year. I have these supposedly spontaneous, uprisings at all of our American college campuses where these kids, whose minds, as Rush Limbaugh used to say, are filled with mush.
Yes, he did. Yes.
Running around chanting from the river to the sea, the land of Israel shall be free, and I got that wrong, Palestine shall be free. Mm-hmm. And you put a microphone in their face and ask them, what river and what sea are you talking about? And they don't really have any idea. They're just kind of revved up through the indoctrination that they've been under. Well, now we discover that Soros is funding a lot of these folks, and we're discovering that the Ayatollah is sending these folks letters, expressing his pleasure with these protests. And I don't know if this particular article from the Tehran Times picks it up, but another source I read indicates that the Ayatollah wrote this letter to these college students telling them to read the Quran. And so all of this revolutionary mindset that we see at our campuses, you have to understand that these folks are siding with Hamas, they're siding with Hezbollah, and they're siding with Iran, the number one state sponsor of terror around the world. And so all of these students have become useful idiots for terrorism and anti-Israelism. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, expresses his dismay with that in this article, but the Ayatollah himself couldn't be happier. So that's just another thing to understand as we're watching all of these supposed, spontaneous protests. This is not grassroots at all. This is more AstroTurf. These people don't represent the United States, and they're being used by powers much bigger than themselves.
Much bigger than themselves. At least there's some adults in the room, like Speaker Mike Johnson. He was met with boos, but he says when you've won the Ayatollah, you've lost America, and he called them aspiring terrorists. And of course, this is spot on. Now, it seems like not enough people are grasping this. I'm happy to see that somebody's grasping that, but my expectations are low. I think it's going to continue. Do you think these protests are just have an open-ended? There's no expiration date. It's just going to go on all summer long, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you remember all the BLM rioting a couple of summers ago. I mean, it was real intense for a while, and then it kind of dried up. I mean, I think these things have a life as long as there's kind of a political scenario in place to give them life, but once the subject changes and people become interested in something else, these things will probably fade away, and then they'll be replaced with something else. But this idea of fomenting revolution, I was listening to Alan Dershowitz not long ago, and he basically made the point that, yes, these kids are young, but they're dangerous. And this is the same exact type of scenario that brought Pol Pot to power, Fidel Castro to power, etc. I mean, our country is really in a very precarious place right now. It's almost like we're in uncharted waters, where there are deliberate revolutions being fomented for the purpose of the strong man to come on the scene and say, "I'll restore order. Just give me some emergency powers." And once that happens, it's over for the United States. And this is something that is a strategy that's been used by Islamists and Marxists called the red-green axis, really around the world. And, we need to be paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah, we sure do. And a lot of it might be, come about in the name of democratic elections, because, in a democracy you can vote for Hitler if that's who you want. So a lot of the world and Americans and youngsters don't understand what that even means versus a constitutional republic. So, it's a mess anyway, and this is just a bigger mess. Russia, let's get back to Russia welcoming NATO member Turkey's joining BRICS. Turkey, a NATO member, is apparently interested in joining BRICS, at least in a why not, what could possibly go wrong kind of way. I know they'd prefer the EU, but I don't see them joining the EU, but I guess it's possible. Anything's possible in this world, Andy. What are your thoughts on Turkey, BRICS or EU? Can they do both? Probably not.
Well, I think Turkey has been kind of given the cold shoulder, with the EU.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, Turkey was, I think still is, a NATO member.
Yep.
I mean, Turkey that we know right now is not the Turkey of the past. In fact, Israelis, believe it or not, used to take their vacations in Turkey. But Ezekiel said, watch Turkey. Turkey is going to shift. Basically, in the Gog Magog scenario, we believe Meshach, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah, would represent modern-day Turkey. And Ezekiel 2,600 years ago saw Turkey shifting. And he actually saw Turkey entering into an alliance with Rosh or Russia. So when I see headlines where Russia is sticking up for Turkey, saying, yeah, come on into BRICS, Turkey, that raises my attention because that's just more evidence of the alliance between Russia and Turkey in the last days. Now, BRICS, that's another topic in and of itself. I mean, BRICS stands for the various nations that want to come together. What is it? Brazil, Russia, is it India, China?
South Africa.
I think South Africa, and there's some others involved. Basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a currency amongst themselves to dislodge or displace the dollar as the lead currency of the world. And unfortunately, they're succeeding. And this explains why the dollar is being dumped by so many nations. I saw an article recently related to Saudi Arabia, dumping the petrodollar. And this becomes the reason why, the United States, is really not a major power in the end times. We have no references in the Bible in the end times to the United States of America. And beyond that, it becomes the reason why everything at the stores is so, much more costly than it used to be because of runaway inflation. And there's actually a reason why this is happening. It's related to BRICS. And here are Israel and American sworn enemies jumping into BRICS, and Russia is involved in it and says, hey, let's let Turkey in as well. So there's a lot of moving parts here, the trend towards globalism, the trend towards a decline of American influence in the last days, and the alliance between Russia or Rosh and Turkey in the last days.
Wow. I'm looking at the new members of BRICS in 2024: Argentina, Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. That's a big group. That's a lot of money. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and, that becomes the reason why at work you can get a raise and still be poorer because the purchasing power of the dollar is in rapid, decline. I mean, my wife and I, our family, as I'm sure you all are just shocked. Just something as simple as going out to dinner. Yeah. How much it costs. Things in the stores that used to be very affordable aren't affordable anymore. And there's an actual reason for that, and it's related to a lot of things. Our national debt and deficit would obviously be part of it, but I think BRICS and their agenda to replace the dollar on the world stage and dump the dollar is a major reason why our country is in decline and why we are experiencing the inflation that we're experiencing.
Wow. And there's so much more we could talk about today. Globalism, now, we only have a couple minutes left. The World Health Assembly, some say that the pandemic treaty passed. Others say it's a total bust. But, they worked time and a half to get at least some amendments and some wording changes. But they're not deterred by this, right? I mean, they're going to just keep pushing this up to 2025 or whatever it takes to get this done. Is that your take on that, too?
Yeah, I mean, I was, of course, delighted that it didn't make it across the finish line, but you have to understand that that's just a bump in the road. Yeah. I mean, that's not a U-turn at all. Right. And if I'm reading this article right, they jammed through all of these amendments at the last minute, one of which is the reason we're under so much pressure on social media, why we can't post this or that.
Sure.
Because there's, in these amendments, condemnations or illegalizations, I should say, of what they call misinformation or disinformation. That's basically anybody that has a perspective on, World Health outside of the World Health Organization. They want to just censor, expert opinion on the jab and all kinds of other things. And so when this agreement comes into existence, and I believe it will, all of these draconian amendments that they jam through at the last minute will be part of it. So our track into globalism, there's no U-turn here. It's just a bump on the road. Sure. I thank God for his restraining influence.
Bingo.
And why he didn't allow it to, come into existence. But it's not going away anytime soon.
I'm glad you said that.
Come back with more vengeance.
Yep. I'm really glad you said that, because we still are in a period of grace, and the Lord is still in control. And so there's just so much hope. Not only is Jesus coming back, but we have time to spread the gospel yet while it's still light. Any last thoughts? Andy Woods, we so appreciate your time. We have less than a minute here. Any last thoughts?
Well, I would just say the world, I like to quote the late Adrian Rogers. He said the world is growing gloriously dark. It's real easy to just become very pessimistic about all of these headlines, but this is really a time for optimism, because Jesus is the morning star. That's that star that breaks forth at the, darkest point of the night, signaling that the dawn is just around on the horizon.
Wow, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Thank you so much, Andy Woods. We'll have to do this again. We so appreciate your insights. So we have Russ Miller next week and many other guests. A lot of great stuff coming next week. So stay with us. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Thanks for joining me. Have a wonderful weekend on purpose.